Story 1. The Architecture of the Empty Vessel. Under the sprawling canopy of a 1,000-year-old banyan tree near the outskirts of Jetavana, a solitary monk sat with eyes closed, observing the frantic construction of a phantom reality within his own skull. He had recently misplaced a simple wooden bowl, an object of no material value. Yet his mind had begun to weave a complex web of lamentation and loss around its absence. The physical vessel was merely fired earth and lacquer, yet the mental imprint it left behind was heavier than a mountain of iron. In the silence of the forest, the monk watched how the concept of ownership functioned as a persistent vibration, a pulse that demanded the external world conform to the internal desire for continuity. He noticed the subtle movement of the intellect as it reached back into the past to retrieve the memory of the bowl, polishing the recollection until it shone with a false luster that the original object never possessed. This was the core of the samsaric engine, the repetitive motion of reaching for what had already dissolved into the ether of change. The Buddha had often spoken of the world as a flame, yet here was the monk, trying to grasp the smoke and wondering why his fingers remained empty. Every breath became a mirror reflecting the futility of the search, for the bowl was not truly lost in the woods, but had never truly been found within the shifting sands of a permanent self. The internal landscape was a theater of shadows, where the light of awareness was obscured by the thick curtains of attachment. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, distorted shapes across the dry earth, the monk began to dismantle the mental scaffolding of his own longing. He saw that the pain of loss was not born from the absence of the object, but from the violent collision between his expectation of permanence and the unrelenting flow of universal decay. The mind was a master architect of suffering, building high walls of identification around every fleeting sensory experience. To let go was not an act of the will, but a realization of the inherent transparency of the thing that was doing the holding. He traced the origins of the thought back to its source, finding nothing but a void that was both terrifying and infinitely spacious. In that space, the lost bowl was neither here nor there, and the monk was neither its owner nor its seeker. The tension in his chest, which had felt like a tightening cord, began to unravel as he accepted the liquid nature of all phenomena. The monastery bells chimed in the distance, their sound rippling through the cool evening air like stones dropped into a still pond. With each toll, the memory of the bowl grew fainter, losing its edges and its weight, until it was nothing more than a passing cloud in a vast, indifferent sky. He understood then that the stress of life was the friction caused by trying to stop the spinning world with the palm of one's hand. The peace he sought was not in the recovery of the lost, but in the total surrender to the inevitable vanishing of everything that is born from a cause. The banyan tree stood as a silent witness to this internal revolution, its roots sinking deep into the dark soil while its branches reached for the first stars of the night. In the stillness of the mind, there was no room for the heaviness of yesterday, only the lightness of the present moment, unburdened by the ghosts of clay and wood. The monk breathed in the scent of damp earth and night jasmine, finding that the world was complete without the bowl, and he was complete without the world. It was a quiet awakening, a gentle shift in the center of gravity from the small, anxious self to the boundless expanse of the unconditioned. To truly see the empty vessel was to understand that there was never anything to hold, and thus nothing to lose. The cycle of birth and death was occurring in every microsecond of his consciousness, a constant stream of arising and passing that required no intervention from a ghostly manager. He rested in the knowledge that his suffering was a choice based on a structural error in perception, a fundamental misunderstanding of the way things are. As the night deepened, the monk remained motionless, a part of the landscape, no longer fighting the current of time, but flowing with it toward the great ocean of silence. The mind was finally at rest, having abandoned the blueprint of a self that was never more than a collection of borrowed parts and fleeting shadows. Story 2. The gravity of a spectral burden. Along the sun-baked path leading toward the kingdom of Magadha, a traveler named Kavi moved with a gait that suggested he was carrying far more than the small bundle tied to his waist. His steps were heavy, each heel striking the dust with a finality that echoed the internal weight of a decade-old resentment. Many years prior, a merchant in a distant market had uttered a string of insults that had carved deep grooves into Kavi's sense of identity. And since that afternoon, Kavi had carried those words like jagged stones within his own heart. The air around him was thick with the scent of dry grass and horse manure, yet his awareness was locked in a cold, sterile room where that single moment was perpetually reenacted. He was trapped in the samsara of memory, a closed loop of mental formations where the past was more real than the burning sun against his skin. The mind, in its desperate attempt to protect the ego, had actually enslaved it to the very pain it sought to avoid. Every time the memory surfaced, Kavi's body reacted as if the insult were happening in the immediate present, his pulse quickening and his muscles tightening in a futile defensive posture. He was a victim of a ghost, haunted by a vibration of sound that had long ago dissipated into the atmosphere. As he walked, he encountered the Buddha sitting quietly by a dry well, a figure of such profound stillness that the surrounding chaos of the dusty road seemed to dissolve in his presence. Kavi did not speak, but the silent radiance of the teacher acted as a catalyst for a sudden, sharp introspection. He began to examine the physical sensations of his anger, tracing the heat in his chest and the pressure behind his eyes. He saw that the grudge was not a static thing, but a process of constant renewal that required his own energy to sustain. Without his active participation in the narrative of being wronged, the insult had no power to exist. It was the dissolution of this narrative that Kavi truly feared, for without his resentment, he did not know who he would be. The grievance had become a structural pillar of his personality, providing a false sense of solidity in a world of constant flux. The mind was using the past to shield itself from the terrifying openness of the present. Looking at the Buddha, Kavi realized that the peace he witnessed was not the result of a battle won, but of a refusal to enter the arena. The traveler stood for a long time by the well, watching the dust settle on his worn sandals, feeling the immense effort it took to maintain the wall of his bitterness. He saw the absurdity of holding a grudge against a person who likely no longer existed in the same form as the merchant from 10 years ago. Both the insulter and the insulted were mere phantoms, ripples in a stream that had already moved miles downstream. The internal stress he felt was the scream of a self that was trying to crystallize water. Slowly, like a man waking from a feverish dream, Kavi began to let the stones fall from his heart. He did not force them out. He simply stopped holding them up. The relief was immediate and physical, a lightness that made the hot air of the plains feel like a cool breeze. He understood that the samsara he lived in was not a place, but a habit of the mind, a tendency to cling to the sharp edges of experience rather than the smooth flow of consciousness. The road ahead still stretched toward the horizon, but the traveler was no longer the same man who had started the journey. The weight was gone because the architect of the weight had been exposed as a fraud. In the silence between his thoughts, he found a space that could not be insulted, a depth that no word could reach. He continued his walk, his steps now light and rhythmic, a part of the great dance of existence that knows neither past nor future. The dust of the road was just dust, and the words of the past were just sound, and Kavi was finally free to inhabit the only moment that has ever truly existed. He smiled at the dry well, recognizing that even emptiness is full of the potential for transformation. The internal landscape had shifted from a fortress to an open field, where the winds of change could blow without meeting any resistance. His mind was no longer a repository of pain, but a clear mirror reflecting the infinite sky of the Buddha's wisdom. Story 3: The Mirage of the Further Shore. High within the jagged foothills of the northern mountains, where the air was thin enough to expose the skeletal architecture of every thought, a seeker named Ananda spent his days walking toward a horizon that never seemed to draw closer. His mind was a restless engine of comparison, constantly measuring the quality of his current silence against an imagined, more profound stillness that he believed awaited him at the next peak. He was haunted by the phantom of a perfect moment, a spiritual destination where the friction of existence would finally cease and the soul would rest in eternal stasis. This internal projection acted as a veil, obscuring the vibrant reality of the stones beneath his feet and the cold mist that clung to his woolen robes. He was a victim of the samsaric habit of deferring life to a future state, a mental trick that rendered the present moment merely a tedious hallway leading to a grand chamber that did not exist. The Buddha had walked these same paths, yet the teacher saw no distance between the step and the goal, while Ananda saw only a void that needed to be filled with distance. The seeker's awareness was divided against itself, one part observing the breath and the other part impatiently waiting for the breath to yield a secret revelation. He began to notice the subtle movement of anticipation as it manifested in the tightening of his solar plexus and the slight forward lean of his neck. It was a physical manifestation of a psychological craving for becoming something other than what he was. The mind was building a bridge out of shadows, and he was exhausted from trying to cross it. One afternoon, near a stream that ran silver with glacial melt, he sat down and watched the water bypass the rocks without hesitation or desire. The water did not seek the ocean. It simply responded to the topography of the land in a series of immediate, unmediated events. Ananda realized that his stress was the result of a conceptual conflict between the truth of the flow and his desire for a destination. The mind was a cartographer of illusions, drawing lines across the terrain of consciousness and calling them boundaries. He saw that the further shore he craved was a construction of the same intellect that felt limited by the near shore. In reality, there was only the river, and he was the river. The tension began to dissolve as he stopped treating his meditation as a task to be completed and instead viewed it as a surrender to the inevitable. The mountains did not change, but his relationship to their height shifted from a challenge to be overcome to a presence to be inhabited. The weight of his seeking had been a self-imposed gravity, a burden of hope that had kept him from seeing the absolute perfection of the mundane. Every bird call and every rustle of the dry grass was a teaching in itself, a demonstration of a universe that required no justification for its being. He understood that enlightenment was not a trophy to be won at the end of a long journey, but the sudden realization that the traveler and the road were never separate entities. The suffering of everyday life was the friction of the mind rubbing against the texture of reality, trying to smooth out the bumps that were essential to the whole. As he rested by the stream, the dichotomy of here and there collapsed into a singular, luminous point of awareness. He was no longer walking toward his life. He was the life that was already occurring. the phantom destination vanished like smoke in a high wind, leaving behind a space so vast that it could contain both the mountain and the seeker without effort. The silence he found was not the absence of sound, but the absence of the one who was listening for something else. In that total presence, the stress of the world was seen as a ripple on the surface of a deep and ancient well, incapable of disturbing the quiet darkness below. He stood up with the sun at his back, not to continue his journey, but to exist within it. Story 4. The Mirror of Shattered Jade. Within the humid confines of a narrow alley in the ancient city of Kashi, a master sculptor named Vardhamana worked with a precision that bordered on a spiritual fever. He was commissioned by a wealthy patron to create an image of a deity that would capture the very essence of divine equanimity. Day and night, the rhythmic strike of his chisel against the cold stone was the only heartbeat he recognized. However, the sculptor's mind was not a place of peace, but a battlefield of perfectionism and fear. He was not merely carving stone. He was carving a monument to his own worth, tethering his entire identity to the outcome of his craftsmanship. The samsara of his existence was found in this desperate loop of validation, where each successful stroke brought a fleeting surge of pride and each minor error felt like a mortal wound to his soul. He watched his mind as it constantly anticipated the praise of the court, while simultaneously dreading the possibility of a flaw that would render his work unremarkable. The stone was a mirror of his internal instability, a physical manifestation of his need to solidify a self that was inherently fluid. One evening, as the scent of funeral pyres from the nearby Ganges drifted through his window, a hairline fracture appeared in the center of the deity's chest. In that moment, Vardhamana experienced an internal fragmentation as profound as the break in the stone. His heart raced and his vision blurred, for the destruction of the statue meant the destruction of the man he thought he was. He was a prisoner of his own creation, bound by invisible threads to an object that was subject to the laws of entropy. He stared at the crack, seeing it not as a geological occurrence, but as a personal betrayal by the universe. As he sat in the deepening shadows of his workshop, he began to witness the mechanics of his own suffering. He saw how the mind had taken a simple material reality, a crack in a stone, and translated it into a narrative of failure and despair. The pain was not in the stone, but in the story he told himself about the stone. He realized that he had spent his life trying to build a fortress of reputation to protect a self that was as fragile as glass. The Buddha's teaching on non-self resonated through the silence of the room like a bell struck in an empty valley. If there was no permanent self to be glorified, there was no permanent self to be shamed by a fracture. The sculptor began to observe the tension in his hands and the knot in his stomach as separate phenomena, rising and falling like waves on a turbulent sea. He saw that his stress was a form of resistance to the natural order of things, a refusal to allow the stone to be what it was. Slowly, he picked up the chisel again, not to fix the crack, but to work with it. The obsession with a perfect outcome began to give way to an appreciation for the process itself, a meditative engagement with the present moment that required no future payoff. He understood that the deity he was trying to carve was already present in the acceptance of the imperfection. The divine was not in the absence of flaws, but in the awareness that could contain both the whole and the broken. As he worked through the night, the boundary between the sculptor, the tool, and the stone began to dissolve. There was only the movement, the sound, and the cool touch of the air. The anxiety that had once driven him was replaced by a quiet, steady focus that was unattached to praise or blame. He saw his previous life as a series of ghosts he had chased through a dark forest, always running and always hungry. Now, he sat in the light of a single oil lamp, finding that the world was enough exactly as it was. The crack in the stone remained, a delicate line of truth in a world of artifice, and it was the most beautiful part of the statue. Vardhamana realized that the true masterpiece was not the stone deity, but the transformation of the mind that no longer sought security in the temporary. He let out a long, slow breath, releasing the last remnants of his need to be a master, and in that release, he finally became one. Story 5. The Echo of a Vanished Bell. In the damp stillness of a monastery tucked into the folds of the Vulture Peak, a young monk found himself paralyzed by the memory of a particular chime that had occurred during the previous dawn. The sound had been exceptionally clear, a perfect piercing of the mountain mist that seemed to hold the promise of total clarity. Ever since that moment, his mind had become a predatory hunter, waiting with a sharp, anxious tension for the bell to repeat that exact frequency. He was suffering from the samsara of comparison, where the vibrant presence of the current silence was judged as inferior to the ghost of a past vibration. The mind had taken a fleeting sensory event and transformed it into a standard of perfection, creating a mental prison built from the bricks of his own preference. The Buddha, walking slowly through the wet grass, noted the monk's rigid posture and the way his breath was held in a state of suspended hope. The stress within the monk was not caused by the silence, but by the internal demand that the world provide a specific resonance to satisfy his craving. He was trying to inhabit a memory while his body was anchored in the present, creating a psychological tear that manifested as a dull ache in his temples. He began to observe the structure of this longing, seeing how the intellect isolated the sound from the infinite stream of causes and conditions that had produced it. The bell was not an independent entity, but a convergence of metal, force, air, and the transient state of the monk's own hearing. To seek its return was to ignore the fundamental law of change that governed every atom of the cosmos. As the monk watched the mist swirl around the ancient stones, he realized that his suffering was the friction of a self trying to freeze a waterfall. The beauty of the sound lay in its disappearance, yet he was treating it as an acquisition. Slowly, he released the grip of his expectation, allowing the memory of the bell to dissolve back into the mountain air. The tension in his chest unfolded like a dried leaf in water, and he found that the current silence was not empty, but pregnant with the potential of all sounds. He was no longer waiting for a miracle. He was the miracle of awareness itself, witnessing the birth and death of each moment without the need to hold on to the wreckage of the past. The world returned to its natural proportions, and the monk walked back toward the hall, his steps no longer burdened by the weight of a vanished chime. Story 6. The Weaver of Tangled Threads. Near the bustling gates of Savatthi, a seeker spent his days observing a spider as it constructed a web between two low-hanging branches of a neem tree. His own mind was a mirror of that web, a complex network of logic and theory that he hoped would eventually capture the essence of truth. He was burdened by the stress of intellectual accumulation, believing that if he could only weave enough concepts together, he would create a safety net against the unpredictability of life. This was the samsara of the philosopher, a cycle of building and rebuilding mental structures that offered no genuine refuge from the pain of existence. The Buddha stood nearby, his shadow falling across the seeker's path, a silent reminder of the difference between the map and the territory. The seeker noticed how his awareness was constantly snagged on the jagged edges of his own doubts, each thought acting as a sticky thread that trapped him in a limited perspective. He was exhausted by the effort of maintaining his worldview, fearing that a single unanswered question would cause the entire structure to collapse. Looking at the spider, he saw that the web was not a destination, but a tool that the creature was ready to abandon the moment it was torn by the wind. The seeker's error was in treating his ideas as a permanent home rather than a temporary scaffolding. He began to examine the feeling of his own confusion, tracing the way his mind rushed to label every experience in an attempt to control it. The stress he felt was the weight of this invisible interdependence between his sense of safety and his need to know. To be free was not to find all the answers, but to lose the need to ask from a place of fear. He saw that the world was already weaving itself without his permission, a vast tapestry of cause and effect that required no cognitive intervention to function. The internal conflict began to fade as he stopped trying to outthink the universe. He let the web of his theories fall away, finding that the space beneath it was not a void of ignorance, but a clarity of being. The spider's work was destroyed by a passing breeze, yet the creature immediately began again, unbothered by the loss of its previous effort. The seeker understood then that the mind's true nature was like the sky, which allows clouds to form and dissolve without being stained by their presence. His everyday pain was the result of trying to hold on to the clouds rather than trusting the sky. In the presence of the Buddha, the seeker finally put down the burden of his cleverness and rested in the simple fact of his own existence. The world was no longer a puzzle to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. And in that surrender, he found the peace that no amount of weaving could ever provide.